Oksana Makar was an ordinary girl from the village Luch in Nikolaev region of Ukraine. Luch is a former military town where a military radar station was located during the Soviet era. In the recent years, following the closure of the station, the village has experienced difficult times. There was a lack of job opportunities and a significant number of residents abused alcohol. Oksana's mother was no exception. She drank heavily and found herself behind bars on several occasions during her lifetime. Although Oksana didn't excel academically and was known for her impulsiveness and confrontational nature, her friends described her as a generous person and a good friend. By the age of 18, Oksana wasn't studying or working, and her life was further complicated by the fact that her family did not support her financially, and she spent most of her time living with her grandparents at that time. Oksana often visited the nearest major city, Nikolaev, when she wanted to relax or have a drink with friends. On the Friday evening of March 9, 2012, 18-year-old Oksana arrived at the center of Nikolaev to visit the cafe bar Rybka to celebrate International Women's Day. Oksana had visited this restaurant several times, often with her acquaintances, and was known by the bartender. According to her, Oksana only drank a can of beer and a small box of juice. At around 10 p.m., several young men entered that cafe, and they took a table next to Oksana's, prompting her to join them. The individuals in question were 24-year-old Maxim Prisezhnuk, 23-year-old Yevgeny Krasnoshok, and 22-year-old Artyom Pogosyan. Oksana knew them. Maxim Prisezhnuk belonged to a wealthy family of government officials from the Nikolaev region, and rumors suggested that his family had connections with the police and other city structures in Nikolaev. It was alleged that some time ago Maxim tried to date Oksana, but she had turned him down. The rejection presumably hurt him, as he believed that with his money and power, no one could reject him. But after this, they still continued to communicate with Oksana as friends. Oksana now joined Maxim, Yevgeny, and Artyom at their table. What happened next was determined based on the accounts of those who were present at the bar that evening, including customers and staff members. 3 men offered Oksana alcohol, after which she apparently became very intoxicated. Soon she was escorted out of the cafe by Maxim, Yevgeny, and Artyom. The bartender also mentioned that other customers noticed that Oksana's drink might have been spiked with some kind of substance that made her unable to resist. They offered her to take to Maxim Prisezhnuk's apartment to sleep it off. And once they entered the apartment, Oksana felt very unwell and went to sleep. Soon Maxim, Yevgeny, and Artyom took advantage of Oksana's helpless state and assaulted her one after another. However, while they've been doing this, Oksana regained consciousness and began to desperately resist and scream as loud as she could. Neighbors have heard the screams but did not call the police. At this point, all 3 of the attackers realized that Oksana is in consciousness and she wouldn't forget what happened to her, and they will be jailed because of it. After it, Yevgeny Krasnoshok began to strangle Oksana with his hands until she showed no signs of life. Believing that he killed Oksana, Krasnoshok again engaged in sexual contact with her. Then Maxim, Yevgeny, and Artyom started planning on how to get rid of Oksana's body. They knew one location, an abandoned construction site of a clinic in the center of Nikolaev, and thought that this place would be safe to dispose the body without having to travel too far and risk being caught. Yevgeny and Artyom went there to inspect the place and plan where they would leave the body. They also wanted to make sure that there were no people around. When they returned, they realized that Oksana is still breathing and Krasnoshok strangled her again, now with a cord. He then wrapped her in a blanket in a pillowcase, and then all 3, Krasnoshok, Prisezhnuk, and Pogosyan, carried her to the territory of abandoned construction site they checked beforehand. As they were exiting the building they were in, they accidentally dropped Oksana on the ground, but she did not make any sound, so at this point they were sure that Oksana is now dead. At the construction site, they descended in the basement, threw the body into a pit filled with garbage, and then set the garbage near Oksana on fire. But after they left, Krasnoshok decided to return to grab a pillowcase he forgot, and he again saw Oksana showing no signs of life, while the trash around her was burning more and more. On the next day, one of the locals, whose car didn't start, decided to walk to work. While passing by, this man heard Oksana's screams coming from the construction site. This man immediately called the police. The police arrived 4 minutes later, and they found Oksana heavily burned in the pit with burnt garbage. The police officers pulled Oksana out of the pit. She stood up, but she instantly fell because of the pain in her burnt feet. She was able to speak, and first thing she did, she named people who had tried to kill her. Oksana was brought to the hospital naked, burned, in a police coat, and with a mark on her neck because she was choked. The burns were horrific, and it was astounding that Oksana was still alive. The doctor who treated her first said, "You have to lie in coals for a long time for burns to reach such depth." Chances for survival were extremely low. Oksana had laid in the burning garbage for so long that some of her organs were almost boiled. Her older sister, who worked as a doctor in another hospital in Nikolaev, informed their mother that Oksana was in a critical condition and she was most likely dying. Oksana's mother was in the ward with Oksana on the next morning. In the evening, March 10th, the police detained 3 men whom Oksana had identified. But on the morning of March 11th, 2 of them, Prisezhnyuk and Pogosyan, were released on bail. Only Evgeny Krasnoshok, who had strangled Oksana, was left under arrest. Soon, rumors about the incident began to spread in the social networks. The first to discuss the case were the residents of Nikolaev, and the fact that 2 of the criminals were released made people very outraged. Everyone began to speculate that there was corruption involved, and Prisezhnyuk and Pogosyan were released by police only because of the fact that they were rich and had powerful parents. People started creating support groups all over the social networks, and because of it, people from other regions from Ukraine started finding out about this case. Meanwhile, the doctors were fighting for Oksana's life. On March 12, her right arm was amputated. They were forced to do so to avoid blood infection from severe burns. Offers came from other medical centers in Ukraine and even Moscow to transport Oksana there. But the doctors decided that her condition was too bad for flights. On the morning of March 13, several dozen residents of Nikolaev held the first protest rally near the building of Central Police Department. While protesting, they burnt a mannequin of one of the accused. After that, the rally moved to prosecutor's office of Nikolaev region. Fearing the possible consequences of growing protests, on March 13th, the police again arrested Prisezhnyuk and Pogosyan. On March 15th, due to Oksana's deteriorating condition, she was put into a medically induced coma and placed on a ventilator. Security was also stationed outside her ward. Soon after that, doctors decided to transport her to Donetsk for treatment at the Donetsk Burn Center. There, she was prepared for skin transplant surgery. On March 15th, the largest rally in support of Oksana Makar took place in the central square of Nikolaev. The square was filled with people. The number of attendees was estimated by the press to be from 2 to 10,000 people. Even after the arrest of the suspects, the public feared that the case would be swept under the rug and the criminals would be released. Protests also took place in the other major cities in Ukraine. People donated blood for Oksana and raised money for her treatment. On March 18th, she was found to have developed pneumonia. Oksana had been lying outside for 10 hours during nighttime. On Thursday, March 29th, Oksana began to experience severe pulmonary bleeding, multiple organ failure, brain swelling, and sepsis, which led to cardiac arrest. Doctors fought for Oksana's life for hours, but it was hopeless. And at 7:30 a.m., Oksana Makar was pronounced dead. She was buried in a white wedding dress, as it is a tradition at the funerals of young females in Ukraine, and in a white coffin on March 31st. There were about 500 people at the funeral, including many children and teenagers, as well as the mayor of Nikolaev. President of Ukraine also sent official condolences. On the June 12, 2012, the first court session took place. The attention of press and the public was focused on the trial. People feared that the accused, especially Maxim Prisezhnuk, could use their connections and money to avoid punishment. The attention was so great that it was practically impossible for all three defendants to avoid punishment, even though they hired the best lawyers who were desperately trying to drag out the trial. On November 27, 2012, the Central Court of Nikolaev found the defendants guilty on all charges and sentenced Yevgeny Krasnoshok to life in prison, Maxim Prisezhnuk to 15 years in prison, and Artyom Pogosyan to 14 years in prison. Immediately after the investigation, the detective who released Prisezhnuk and Pogosyan after the initial arrest was fired. But few months after the case was closed, this detective was reinstated at his job. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and maybe subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.